All right. Greetings and good evening. This is the Lev Project, and I gotta say 1 minute real early. Give me 1 second. Thank you for those who have just joined us. This is the Lev Project, and my name is Imuna Yisrael. And I want to thank those who are joining us and those who are watching on the replay. I'm just sitting here getting things ready. Been a long day, but as always, the story is it pulls you in, and so definitely join us as we're about to go into what's really happening here. Give me 1 second here. Make sure everything is well posted on social media and share before we get started. For those who don't know, we're reading Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. This book was written in the 1860s, published in 1861. The author's name is Harriet Jacobs. There's a link to the free copy. It's in the Collective Commons, so definitely, you can read it. The only thing that you desire is really a will to read it. If you want to buy the hard copy, it's actually like $4 on Amazon. So that in itself is not very expensive. I marvel at how inexpensive the history is concerning just getting a grasp of what has come before us. It's not like, college books, that's $200 books. There's so much wisdom in these books, $4, because no one values it anymore. So, it's not even $20, $30, $40 textbook. You can get a wealth of information just for $4. Or if you have the will, I don't really like reading too much online. It messes with my eyes for a long period of time. But if you're an online reader, you can read it for free, So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I already posted the link. I shared it. And so I'm trying to give a little time. Let me play a song and then give everybody some time to join us so they won't just drop dead in the middle of the thing. I usually just go straight into it, but today I'm gonna warm up with a little all on there and see if I can get a little something to play here. If not, 1 second. Let's see if I can get something. Yeah, you can't play really copyrighted stuff on. If you activate certain things on YouTube, they won't allow you to play copyrighted stuff. They'll come at you. So let me see if I find anything. If not, I'm just gonna scratch the song. Scratch the song and go right into the reading. And I think that's what I'm gonna do because I'm doing too much clicking right about now all over the place to try to find something. So I'm gonna just go ahead and go into the reading. All right. I'm gonna just go ahead and go into the reading. All right, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, Chapter 9. Sketches of neighboring slaveholders. If we don't remember, yesterday she was telling us about the jealous mistress, Mrs. Flint, the crazy lady who was breathing over her while she was sleeping. The nasty, what is the word I'm looking for here? Predatorial slave master, Mr. Flint, the doctor, who sexually harassing her, looking to exploit her, monopolize, and manipulate her for his own purposes in all aspects. So she was really talking about her plight as a slave girl. It says there was a planter in the country not far from us, whom I will call Mr. Litch. He was an ill-bred, uneducated man, but very wealthy. He had 600 slaves, many of whom he did not know by sight. That was a big corporation. You work for one of the big companies, they don't even know your name. It's the same thing, slave, plantation, corporations, same thing. So Mr. Litch had 600 slaves. His extensive plantation was managed by well-paid overseers. There was a jail and a whipping post on his grounds. and whatever cruelties were perpetuated there, they passed without comment. He was so effectually screened by his great wealth that he was called to no account for his crimes, not even for murder. Various were the punishments resorted to. A favorite one was to tie a rope round a man's body and suspend him from the ground. A fire was kindled over him, from which he was suspended, from which was suspended a piece of fat pork. As this cooked, the scalding drop of fat continually fell on the bare flesh. On his own plantation, he required very strict obedience to the eighth commandment, but depredations of the neighbors are allowed, provided the culprit managed to evade detection or suspicion. That you don't rob me, but you can rob others. If a neighbor brought a charge of theft against any of his slaves, he was browbeaten by the master, who assured him that his slaves had enough of everything at home and had no inducement to steal. No sooner was the neighbor's back turned than the accused was sought out and whipped for his lack of discretion. If a slave stole from him even a pound of meat or a peck of corn, if detection followed, he was put in chains and imprisoned, and so kept till his form was assuaged by hunger and suffering. A freshest once bore his wine cellar and meat house miles away from the plantation. Some slaves followed and secured bits of meat and bottles of wine. Two were detected, a ham and some liquor being found in their huts. They were summoned by their masters. No words were used, but a club fell them to the ground. A rough box was their coffin, and the interment was a dog's burial. Nothing was said. So you steal from him, he's gonna take you out. You steal from the neighbor, he pretends like it's nothing. This was a wicked slave master who had so many slaves that, and he was so rich, 600 of them. For those who just joined us, thank you for joining us. This is the Left Project. We just started off on chapter 9, and she's giving us a look at of some of the things that were going on to neighboring plantations. I'm not gonna get off track. I could say some stuff, but let me just keep reading. Murder was so common on his plantation that he feared to be alone after nightfall. He might have believed in ghosts. His brother, if not equal in wealth, was at least equal in cruelty. His bloodhounds were well trained. Their pen was spacious and a terror to the slaves. They were let loose on a runaway, and if they tracked him, they literally tore the flesh from his bones. When this slaveholder died, his shrieks and groans were so painful that they appalled his own friends. His last words were, "I'm going to hell. Bury my money with me." After death, his eyes remained open. To press the lids down, silver dollars were laid on them. These were buried with him. For their circumstance, a new rumor went abroad that his coffin was filled with money. 3 times his grave was opened and his coffin taken out. The last time his body was found on the ground and a flock of buzzards were pecking at it. He was again interred and a sentinel set over his grave. The perpetrators were never discovered. Cruelty is contagious in uncivilized communities. Mr. Conant, a neighbor of Mr. Litch, returned from town one evening in a partial state of intoxication. His body servant gave him some offense. He was divested of his clothes except his shirt, whipped and tied to a large tree in front of the house. It was a stormy night in winter. The wind blew, bitterly cold, and the boughs of the old tree crackled under falling sleet. A member of the family, fearing he would freeze to death, begged that he might be taken down, but the master would not relent. He remained there 3 hours, and when he was cut down, he was more dead than alive. Another slave who stole a pig from his master to appease his hunger was terribly flogged. In desperation, he tried to run away. But at the end of 2 miles, he was so faint with loss of blood, he thought he was dying. He had a wife, and he longed to see her once more. Too sick to walk, he crept back that long distance on his hands and knees. When he reached his master's, it was night. He had not strength to rise and open the gate. He moaned and tried to call for help. I had a friend living in the same family. At last his cry reached her. She went out and found the prostrate man at the gate. She ran back to the house for assistance, and two men returned with her. They carried him in and laid him on the floor. The back of his shirt was one clot of blood. By means of lard, my friend loosened it from the raw flesh. She bandaged him, gave him cool drink, and left him to rest. The master said he deserved 100 more lashes when his own labor was stolen from him. He had stolen food to appease his hunger. This was his crime. And this is something that I've read quite a few of books and slave testimonies, that they had you right on the right on the edge of hunger and starvation. They just gave you enough to get through. And many of the slaves were still very hungry. And many of them like stealing unclean food. Many of them stole pork, they stole corn, but mostly they stole meats and things of that nature. And knowing that they deprived you, they didn't say, it's me that's wronging you. They went and beat you, ostracized you and did a manner of things. So this is what she's describing. And I just wanted to say, I've seen that in a lot of other narratives as well. Another neighbor was a Mr. Wade. At no hour of the day was there cessation of lash on her premises. Her labors began with the dawn and did not cease till long after nightfall. The barn was her particular place of torture. There she lashed the slaves with the might of a man. An old slave of hers once said to me, "It is hell in Mrs. House. Piers, I can never get out. Day and night I prays to die." The mistress died before the old woman, and when dying, entreated her husband not to permit any one of her slaves to look on her after death. A slave who nursed her children and who had still a child in her care watched her chance and stole with it in her arms to the room where lay her dead mistress. She gazed a while on her, then raised her hand and dealt 2 blows on her face, saying, as she did so, "The devil's got you now." So she came in and slapped the dead woman twice. She forgot that the child was looking on. She had just began to talk, and she said to her father, "I did see Ma and Mammy did strike Ma so," striking her own face with her little hand. So the little Euro girl told on her. The master was startled. He could not imagine how the nurse could obtain access to the room where the corpse lay, for he kept the door locked. He questioned her. She confessed what the child had said was true and told how she had procured the key. She was sold to Georgia. She was sold for slapping a dead woman. Okay. In my childhood, I knew a valuable slave named Charity and loved her as all children did. Her young mistress married and took her to Louisiana. Her little boy, James, was sold to a good sort of master. He became involved in debt, and James was sold again to a wealthy slaveholder noted for his cruelty. With this man, he grew up to the manhood, receiving the treatment of a dog. After a severe whipping to save himself from further infliction of the lash with which he was threatened, he took to the woods. He was in a most miserable condition, cut by the cowskin, half naked, half starved, and without the means of procuring a crust of bread. Some weeks after his escape, he was captured, tied, and carried back to his master's plantation. This man considered punishment in his jail on bread and water after receiving 100 of the lashes, too mild for a poor slave's offense. Therefore, he decided, after the overseer should have whipped him to his satisfaction, to have him placed between the screws of the cotton gin, to stay as long as he had been in the woods. This stretched creature was cut with the whip from his head to his feet, then washed with strong brine to prevent the flesh from mortifying and make it heal sooner than it otherwise would. He was then put into the cotton gin, which was screwed down, only allowing him room to turn on his side when he could not lie on his back. Every morning a slave was sent with a piece of bread and a bowl of water, which were placed within reach of the poor fellow. The slave was charged under penalty of severe punishment not to speak to him. I'm holding myself back from speaking right now. Let me continue. 4 days passed, and the slave continued to carry the bread and water. On the second morning, he found the bread gone, but the water untouched. When he had been in the press 4 days and 5 nights, they put him in a cotton gin. The slave informed his master that the water had not been used for 4 mornings, and that a horrible stench came from the gin house. The overseer was sent to examine into it. When the press was unscrewed, the dead body was found partly eaten by rats and vermin. Perhaps the rats that devoured his bread had gnawed him before life was extinct. Poor Charity. Grandmother and I often asked each other how her affectionate heart would bear the news if she should ever hear of the murder of her son. We had known her husband and knew that James was like him in manliness and intelligence. These are the qualities that made it so hard for him to be a plantation slave. They put him into a rough box and buried him with less feeling than would have been manifested for an old house dog. Nobody asked any questions. He was a slave. And the feeling was that the master had a right to do what he pleased with his own property. And what did he care for the value of a slave? He had hundreds of them. When they had finished their daily toil, they must hurry to eat their little morsels and be ready to extinguish their pine knots before 9 o'clock when the overseer went his patrol rounds. He entered every cabin to see that men and their wives had gone to bed together, lest the men from over fatigue should fall asleep in the chimney corner and remain there till morning horn called them to their daily task. Women were considered of no value unless they continually increased their own stock. Breeding machines. Sorry, I put that in. That's a Muna saying breeding machines. They are put on par with animals. The same master shot a woman through the head who had run away and been brought back to him. No one called him to account for it. If a slave resisted being whipped, the bloodhounds were unpacked and set upon him to tear his flesh from his bones. The master who did these things were highly educated and styled a perfect gentleman. He also boasted the name and standing of a Christian through Satan, though Satan never had a true follower. She said dude was really a Satanist. I could tell of more slaveholders as cruel as those I've described. There are not exceptions to the general rule. I do not say there are no humane slaveholders. Such characters do exist, notwithstanding the hardening influences around them. But they are like angel visits, few and far between. I knew a young lady who was one of these rare specimens. She was an orphan and inherited as slaves a woman and her 6 children. Their father was a free man. They had a comfortable home of their own. Parents and children lived together because that wasn't normal. That's why she's noting it. That's not a normal occurrence. The families were often split. The mother and eldest daughter served their mistress during the day and at night returned to their dwelling, which was on the premises. The young lady was very pious, and there was some reality in her religion. She taught her slaves to lead pure lives and wished them to enjoy the fruits of their own industry. Her religion was not a garb put on for Sunday and laid aside till Sunday return again. The eldest daughter of the slave mother was promised in marriage to a free man. And the day before the wedding, this good mistress emancipated her in order that her marriage might have been sanctioned of law. Report said this young lady cherished an unrequited affection for a man who had resolved to marry for wealth. In the course of time, a rich uncle of hers died. He left $6,000 to his 2 sons by a colored woman, and the remainder of his property to his orphan niece. The metals soon attracted this magnate. The lady and her weighty purse became his. She offered to manumit her slaves, telling them that her marriage might make unexpected changes in their destiny, and she wished to ensure their happiness. They refused. Listen to this. So she wanted to free the slaves that she had because she was about to marry a dude and he might have been something else. So they refused to take their freedom, saying that she had always been their best friend and they could not be so happy anywhere as with her. I was not surprised. I had often seen them in their comfortable home and thought that the whole town did not contain a happier family. They had never felt slavery, and when it was too late, they were convinced of its reality. When the new master claimed his family as his property, the father became furious and went to his mistress for protection. I can do nothing for you now, Harry, said she. I no longer have the power I had a week ago. I have succeeded in obtaining the freedom of your wife, but I cannot obtain it for your children. The unhappy father swore that nobody should take his children from him. He concealed them in the woods for some days, but they were discovered and taken. The father was put in jail, and the two oldest brothers sold to Georgia. You had an opportunity, but one little girl, too young to be of service to her master, was left with the wretched mother. The other three were carried to their master's plantation. The eldest son became a mother. The eldest soon became a mother, and when the slaveholder's wife looked at the babe, she wept bitterly. She knew that her own husband had violated the purity she had so carefully inculcated. She had a second child by her master, and then he sold her and his offsprings to his brother. She bore two children to the brother and was sold again. The next sister went crazy. The life she was compelled to lead drove her mad. The third one became the mother of 5 daughters. Before the birth of the fourth, the pious mistress died. To the last, she rendered every kindness to the slave that her unfortunate circumstances permitted. She passed away peacefully, glad to close her eyes on a life which had been made so wretched by the man she loved. This man squandered the fortune he had received and sought to retrieve his affairs by a second marriage. But having retired after a night of drunken debauch, he was found dead in the morning. He was called a good master, for he fed and clothed his slaves better than most masters, and the lash was not heard on his plantation so frequently as on many others. Had it not been for slavery, he would have been a better man, and his wife a happier woman. No pen can give an adequate description of all pervading corruption produced by slavery. The slave girl is revered in an atmosphere of licentiousness and fear. The lash and the foul talk of her master and his sons are her teachers. When she is 14 or 15, her owner or his sons or the overseer, or perhaps all of them, begin to bribe her with presents. If these fail to accomplish their purpose, she is whipped or starved into submission to their will. She may have had religious principles inculcated by some pious mother or grandmother or some good mistress. She may have a lover whose good opinion and peace of mind are dear to her heart, or the profligate men who have power over her may be exceedingly odious to her, but resistance is hopeless. The poor worm shall prove her contest vain. Life's little days shall pass, and she is gone. The slaveholder's sons are, of course, the slaveholder's sons are, of course, vitiated, even while boys, by the unclean influences everywhere around them. Nor do the master's daughters always escape. Several retributions sometimes come upon him from the wrongs he does to the daughters of the slaves. The white daughters early hear their parents quarreling about some female slave. Their curiosity is excited, and they soon learn the cause. They are attended by the young slave girls whom their father has corrupted, and they hear such speak as should never meet youthful ears or any other ears. They know that the women slaves are subject to their father's authority in all things, and in some cases they exercise the same authority over the men slaves. They defile the men slaves as well. Out of control. I have myself seen the master of such a household whose head was bowed down in shame, for it was known in the neighborhood that his daughter had selected one of the meanest slaves on the plantation to be the father of his first grandchild. She did not make her advances to her equals, nor even to her father's more intelligent servants. She selected the most brutalized, over whom her authority could be exercised with less fear of exposure. Her father, half frantic with rage, sought to revenge himself on the offending black man, but his daughter, foreseeing the storm that would rise, had given him free papers and send him out of the state. In such cases, the infant is smothered or sent where it is never seen by any who know its history. But If the white parent is the father instead of the mother, the offsprings are unblushingly reared for the market. If they are girls, I have indicated plainly enough what will be their inevitable destiny. You may believe what I say, for I write only what there whereof I know. I was 21 years in the cage of the obscene birds. I can testify from my own experience and observation that slavery is a curse to the whites as well as the blacks. It makes the white fathers cruel and sensual, the sons violent and licentious. It contaminates the daughters and makes the wives wretched. And as for the colored race, it needs an ambler pen than mine to describe the extremity of their sufferings, the depth of their degradation. Yet few slaveholders seem to be aware of the widespread moral ruin occasioned by this wicked system. Their talk is of blighted cotton crops, not of blight on their children's soul. If you want to be fully convinced of the abominations of slavery, go on a southern plantation and call yourself a Negro trader. Then there will be no concealment, and you will see and hear things that will seem to you impossible among human beings with immortal souls. That chapter was like deep. For those who have just joined us, my name is Amuni Yisrael. This is the Left Project. We just finished up chapter 9. She goes into some of the experiences, the stories that she heard for those that were going on around her. And as you go into slavery more, you understand it was not a monolithic structure. These were little private business entities. Each farm was its own business entity, and each farm or each plantation had its own set of rules. It's just like corporations today. You go into small businesses, everybody doesn't run it the same. So this is what she's expressing in saying what happened on her neighbor's farm. Depending on the temperament of the slave master and the way in which they ran their shop, some places would be more brutal than others. And that's just wild, really, really wild. So we're going to go on to chapter 10 now. Chapter 10, a perilous passage in the slave girl's life. After my lover went away, Dr. Flint contrived a new plan. He seemed to have an idea that my fear of my mistress was his greatest obstacle. In the blandest tones, he told me he was going to build a small house for me in a secluded place 4 miles away from the town. I shuddered, but I was constrained to listen while he talked of his intention to give me a home of my own and to make a lady of me. Sorry. So he's still pushing. He ran away her prospect and he's still pushing for his nasty little plan, right? I shuddered, but I was constrained to listen while he talked of his intention to give me a home of my own and to make a lady of me. Hitherto, I had escaped my dreaded fate by being in the midst of people. My grandmother had already had high words with my master about me. She had told him pretty plainly what she thought of his character, and there was considerable gossip in the neighborhood about our affairs, to which the open-mouthed jealousy of Mrs. Flint contributed not a little. When my master said he was going to build a house for me and that he could do it with little trouble and expense, I was in hopes something would happen to frustrate his scheme. But I soon heard the house was actually begun. I vowed before my maker that I would never enter it. I had rather toil on the plantation from dawn till dark. I had rather live and die in jail than drag on from day to day through such a living death. She was serious. I was determined that the master whom I so hated and loathed, who had blighted the prospects of my youth and made my life a desert, should not, after all my long struggle with him, succeed at last in trampling his victim under his feet. I would do anything, everything for the sake of defeating him. What could I do? I thought and thought till I became desperate and made a plunge into the abyss. And now, reader, I come to a period in my unhappy life which I would gladly forget if I could. The remembrance fills me with sorrow and shame. It pains me to tell you of it, but I have promised to tell you the truth, and I will do it honestly, let it cost me what it may. I will not try to screen myself behind the pleas of compulsion from a master, for it was not so. Neither can I plead ignorance or thoughtlessness. For years, my master had done his utmost to pollute my mind with foul images and to destroy the pure principles inculcated by my grandmother and the good mistress of my childhood. The influence of slavery had the same effect on me that it had on other young girls. They had made me prematurely knowing concerning the evil ways of the world. I knew what I did, and I did it with deliberate calculations. But O ye happy women whose purity have been sheltered from childhood, who have been free to choose the objects of your affection, whose homes are protected by law, do not judge the poor desolate slave girl too severely. If slavery had been abolished, I also could have married the man of my choice. I could have had a home shielded by laws. I should have been spared the painful task of confessing what I'm now about to relate. But all my prospects had been blighted by slavery. I wanted to keep myself pure, and under the most adverse circumstance, I tried hard to preserve my self-respect, but I was struggling alone in the powerful grasp of the demon slavery, and the monster proved too strong for me. I felt as if I was forsaken by God and man, as if my efforts must be frustrated, and I became reckless in my despair. Now, I've told you that Dr. Flint's persecution and his wife's jealousy had given rise to some gossip in the neighborhood. Among others, it chanced that a white unmarried gentleman had obtained some knowledge of the circumstance on which I was placed. He knew my grandmother and often spoke to me in the street. He became interested for me and asked questions about my master, which I answered in part. He expressed a great deal of sympathy and a wish to aid me. He constantly sought opportunities to see me and wrote to me frequently. I was a poor slave girl, only 15 years old. So much attention from a superior person was, of course, flattering, for human nature is the same in all. I also felt grateful for his sympathy and encouraged by his kind words. It seemed to me a great thing to have such a friend. By degrees, a more tender feeling crept into my heart. He was an educated and eloquent gentleman, too eloquent, alas, for the poor slave girl who trusted in him. Of course, I saw whither all this was tending. I knew the implausible gulf between us. But to be an object of interest to a man who is not married and who is not her master is agreeable to the pride and feelings of a slave, if her miserable situation had left her any pride or sentiment. It seems less degrading to give oneself than to submit to compulsion. There is something akin to freedom in having a lover who has no control over you except that which he gains by kindness and attachment. A master may treat you as rudely as he pleases, and you dare not speak. Moreover, the wrong does not seem so great with an unmarried man. So with one who has a wife to be made unhappy. There may be sophistry in all this, but the condition of a slave confuses all principles of morality, and in fact renders the practice of them impossible. When I found that my master had actually begun to build the lovely cottage, other feelings mixed with those I have described. Revenge and calculations of interest were added to flattery, vanity, and sincere gratitude for kindness. I knew nothing would enrage Dr. Flint so much as to know I had favored another, and it was something to triumph over my tyrant even in the small way. I thought he would revenge himself by selling me, and I was sure my friend Mr. Sands would buy me. He was a man of more generosity and feelings than my master, and I thought my freedom could be easily obtained from him. So she about to let this euro, okay, let me not ruin it. But Mr. Sands, for those who just joined us, this is the Left Project. She's reasoning in her mind. She wants to get away from the slave master, Dr. Flint. And now this European man, Mr. Sands, he's kicking game to her. So now she's contemplating. He was a man of more generosity and feeling than my master, and I thought my freedom could be easily obtained from him. The crisis of my fate now came so near that I was desperate. I shuddered to think of being the mother of children that should be owned by my own tyrant. I knew that as soon as a new fancy took him, his victims were so far off to get rid of them, especially if they had children. I have seen several women sold with his babies at the breast. He never allowed his offspring by a slave to remain long in the sight of himself and his wife. It's all a game. Of a man who was not my master, I could ask to have my children well supported in this case. I felt confident I should obtain the boon. I also felt sure, quite sure that they would be made free. With all these thoughts revolving in my mind and seeing no other way of escaping the doom I so much dreaded, I made a headlong plunge. Pity me and pardon me, O virtuous reader. You never know what it's like to be a slave, to be entirely unprotected by law or custom, to have the laws reduce you to the condition of chattel, entirely subject to the will of another. You never exhausted your ingenuity in avoiding the snares and eluding the power of a hated tyrant. You never shuddered at the sound of his footsteps and trembled within hearing of his voice. I know I did wrong. No one can feel it more sensibly than I do. The painful and humiliating memory will haunt me to my dying day still, in looking back calmly on the events of my life. I feel the slave woman ought not to be judged by the same standards as others. The months passed on, and I had many unhappy hours. I secretly mourned over the sorrow I was bringing on my grandmother, who had so tried to shield me from harm. I knew that I was the greatest comfort of her old age, and that it was a source of pride to her that I had not degraded myself like most slaves. I wanted to confess to her that I was no longer worthy of her love, but I could not utter the dreaded words. As for Dr. Flint, I had a feeling of satisfaction and triumph in the thought of telling him. From time to time, he told me of his intended arrangements, and I was silent. At last, he came and told me the cottage was completed and ordered me to go to it. I told him I would never enter it. He said, I have heard enough of such talk as that. You shall go if you are carried by force, and you shall remain there. I replied, I will never go there. In a few months, I shall be a mother. He stood and looked at me in a dumb amazement and left the house without a word. I thought I should be happy in my triumph over him, but now the truth was out and my relatives would hear of it. I felt wretched. Humble as were their circumstances, they had pride in my good character. Sorry. Now, how could I look them in the face? My self-respect was gone. I had resolved that I would be virtuous, though I was a slave. I had said, let the storm beat, I will brave it till I die. And now how humiliated I felt. I went to my grandmother. My lips moved to make confession, but my words stuck in my throat. I sat down in the shade of a tree at her door and began to sew. I think she saw something unusual was the matter with me. The mother of slaves is very watchful. She knows there is no security for her children. After they have entered their teens, she lives in daily expectation of trouble. This lends to many questions. If the girl is of a sensitive nature, timidity keeps her from answering truthfully, and this well-meant course has a tendency to drive her from maternal counsel. Presently, in came my mistress like a madwoman and accused me of concerning her husband. My grandmother, whose suspicions had previously awakened, believed what she said. She exclaimed, "Oh, Linda, has it come to this? I had rather see you dead than to see you as you are now. You are a disgrace to your dead mother." She tore from my fingers my mother's wedding ring and her silver thimble. "Go away," she exclaimed, "and never come to my house again." Her reproaches fell so hot and heavy that they left me no chance to answer. Bitter tears, such as the eyes never shed but once, were my only answer. I rose from my seat but fell back again, sobbing. She did not speak to me, but the tears were running down her furrowed cheeks and they scorched me like fire. She had always been so kind to me, so kind. How I longed to throw myself at her feet and tell her all the truth. But she had ordered me to go and to never come there again. After a few minutes, I mustered strength and started to obey her. With what feelings did I now close that little gate, which I used to open with such an eager hand in my childhood? It closed upon me with a sound I never heard before. Where could I go? I was afraid to return to my masters. I walked on recklessly, not caring where I went or what would become of me. When I had gone 4 or 5 miles, fatigue compelled me to stop. I sat down on the stump of an old tree. The stars were shining through the boughs above me. How they mocked me with their bright, calm light. The hours passed by, and as I sat there alone, a chilliness and deadly sickness came over me. I sank on the ground. My mind was full of horrid thoughts. I prayed Well, let me say she prayed to die, but the prayer was not answered. At last, with great effort, I rose myself and walked some distance further to the house of a woman who had been a friend of my mother. When I told her why I was there, she spoke soothingly to me, but I could not be comforted. I thought I could bear my shame if I could only be reconciled to my grandmother. I longed to open my heart to her. I thought if she could know the real estate of the cause and all I had been bearing for years, she would perhaps judge me less harshly. My friend advised me to send for her. I did so. But days of agonizing suspense passed before she came. Had she utterly forsaken me? No, she came at last. I knelt before her and told her the things that had poisoned my life, how long I had been persecuted, that I saw no way of escape, and in the hour of extremity I became desperate. She listened in silence. I told her I would bear anything and do anything if in time I had hopes of obtaining her forgiveness. I begged of her to pity me for my dead mother's sake, and she did pity me. She did not say, I forgive you, but she looked at me lovingly with her eyes full of tears. She laid her old hands gently on my head and murmured, poor child, poor child. That's the end of the reading of chapter 10. For those who have just joined us, this incident in the life of a slave girl. The book just reads so smooth, it just makes you want to keep reading. For those who have just joined us, it got crazy. She didn't directly said what she did, but basically she laid with Mr. Sands and conceived by him so that she didn't have to deal with the nasty, grimy. She wanted the choice. So even though it was another European, she wanted the choice in hopes that her children would be free. Her grandmother didn't know all of the sexual harassment that she was enduring. So grandma flipped on her, and she's an orphan, by the way. Her mother and father died. So grandmother flipped on her and actually thought that, she was just being loose. But in actuality, she was 15 and desperate. And as she was saying, you were corrupted sexually, mentally, spiritually from a very young age as a slave girl. And there was no protection. Your father couldn't protect you. Your brothers couldn't protect you, and you were at the beck and call of the system. And so this is what she is sharing. I see somebody might be sharing something at this point. If you have anything to say, feel free to do so. I see Ima Janita is saying something here, and then I'm gonna read on chapter 11. I'm surprised she was not killed. I think, like she said, if we came, it was strange. She said that it's not normal, but he seemed to have had an obsession of conquering. So I think it was more of an egotistical game for the slave master to, like she said, once they did conceive and once he did get them in his reach, he would impregnate them and then sell them off because he's already conquered. And so because he wasn't able to do that, then the game wasn't over. And so I think this is why he's more, as we read on, he's more apt to keep her alive or not whip her and scourge her because he hasn't scored as yet, so to say, for lack of a better word. So if anybody has anything or input to put in, definitely. There's so much in this that, wow, it's deep. But I'm going to go on to chapter 11, and then we're going to end it for tonight. The New Tie to Life, chapter 11. I returned to my good grandmother's house. She had an interview with Mr. Sands when she asked him why he could not have left her one ewe lamb, whether there were not plenty of slaves who did not care about character. He made no answer, but he spoke kind and encouraging words. He promised to care for my child and to buy me, be the condition what they might. I had not seen Dr. Flint for 5 days. I had never seen him since I made the avowal to him. He talked of the disgrace I had brought on myself, how I had sinned against my master and mortified my old grandmother, like he cares, right? He intimated that if I had accepted his proposal, he, as a physician, could have saved me from exposure. His proposal is that he defiled the girl, okay? For those who maybe knew, his proposal is that he wanted to humble her, he wanted to defile her. He even what is this? Condescended to pity me. Could he have offered wormwood more bitter? He whose persecutions had been the cause of my sin. Linda, said he, though you have been criminal towards me, I feel for you. I can pardon you if you obey my wishes. Tell me whether the fellow you want to marry is the father of your child. If you deceive me, you shall feel the fires of hell. I did not feel as proud as I had done. My strongest weapon with me was gone. I was lowered in my own estimation and had resolved to bear his abuse in silence. But when he spoke contemptuously of the lover who had always treated me honorably, when I remembered that but for him, I might have been a virtuous, free, and happy wife, I lost my patience. I have sinned against God and myself, I replied, but not against you. He clenched his teeth and muttered, "Curse you." He came towards me with ill-suppressed rage and exclaimed, "You obstinate girl, I could grind your bones into powder. You have thrown yourself away to some worthless rascal. You are weak-minded and have been easily persuaded by those who don't care a straw for you. The future will settle accounts between us. You are blinded now, but hereafter you will be convinced that your master was your best friend." Sounds like some abusive relationship right there. My leniency toward you is proof of it. I might have punished you in many ways. I might have had you whipped till you fell dead under the lash, but I wanted you to live. I would have bettered your condition. Others can't do it. You are my slave. Your mistress, disgusted by your conduct, forbids you to return to the house. Therefore, I leave you here for the present, but I shall see you often. I will call you tomorrow. Psycho. He came with frowning brows that showed a dissatisfied state of mind. I see somebody and this up on social media. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit into it. Cain, Ima saying Cain, like the grandmother said, poor child, 15 years old, she's a little girl. She's a little girl. She doesn't have the tools of which to deal. A grown person doesn't have the tools, much less. And she's a little girl. So you can just imagine this dude, not only is she pregnant, now he's still pressuring her. So let me continue here. Sorry about that. I think the chat is open on the YouTube. So if you have any questions, it is. So if you have any questions or anything to add, feel free to do so. Kane, you want more of the story? You might say you just want more of the story. I agree. It's a story that I read this book, it's a story that make you just keep going. All right. He came with frowning brows that showed a dissatisfied state of mind. After asking about my health, he inquired whether my board was paid and who visited me. He then went on to say that he had neglected his duty, that as a physician, there were certain things that he ought to have explained to me. Then followed talk such as would made the most shameless blush. He ordered me to stand up before him. I obeyed. I command you, said he. Sorry, let me go back in his voice. Sorry. I obeyed. I command you, said he, to tell me whether the father of your child is a white or a black. I hesitated. Answer me this instant, he exclaimed. I did answer. He sprang upon me like a wolf and grabbed my arm as if he would have broken it. Do you love him? Said he in a hissing tone. I am thankful that I do not despise him, I replied. He raised his hand to strike me, but it fell again. I don't know what arrested the blow. He sat down with lips tightly compressed. At last he spoke. I came here, he said, to make you a friendly proposition, but your ingratitude chafes me beyond endurance. You turn aside all my good intentions toward you. I don't know what it is that keeps me from killing you. Again, he rose as if he had a mind to strike me, but he resumed but he resumed, on one condition, I will forgive your insolence and crime. You must henceforth have no communication of any kind with the father of your child. You must not ask him for anything. You must not ask anything from him or receive anything from him. I will take care of you and your child. What does that sound like? And you had better promise this at once and not wait till you are deserted by him. This is the last act of mercy I will show towards you. I said something about being unwilling to have my child supported by a man who had cursed it, and me also. He rejoined that a woman who had sunk to my level had no right to expect anything else. He asked for the last time, would I accept his kindness? I answered, I would not. Very well, said he. Then take the consequences of your wayward course. Never look to me for help. You are my slave and shall always be my slave. I will never sell you. That you may depend on. He's a little bit salty at this point. Hope died away in my heart as he closed the door after him. I had calculated that in his rage he would sell me to the slave trader, and I knew the father of my child was on the watch to buy me. About this time, my uncle Philip was expected to return from a voyage. The day before his departure, I had officiated as bridesmaid to a young friend. My heart was then ill at ease, but my smiling countenance did not betray it. Only a year had passed, but what fearful changes it had wrought. My heart had grown gray in misery. Lives that flash in sunshine and lives that are born in tears receive their hue from circumstances. None of us know what a year may bring forth. I felt no joy when they told me my uncle had come. He wanted to see me, though he knew what had happened. I shrank from him at first, but at last consented that he should come to my room. He received me as he always had done. Oh, how my heart smote me when I felt his tears on my burning cheeks. The words of my grandmother came to my mind. Perhaps your mother and father are taken from the evil days to come. My disappointed heart could not praise God that it was so. But why, thought I, did my relatives ever cherish hopes for me? What was there to save me from the unusual fate of slave girls? Many more beautiful and more intelligent than I experienced a similar fate, or a far worse one. How could they hope? How could they hope that I should escape? My uncle's stay was short, and I was not sorry for it. I was too ill in mind and body to enjoy my friends as I had done. For weeks, I was unable to leave my bed. I could not have any doctor but my master, and I would not have him sent for. At last, alarmed by my increasing illness, they sent for him. I was very weak and nervous, and as soon as he entered the room, I began to scream. They told him my state was very critical. He had no wish to hasten me out of the world, and he withdrew. When the baby was born, they said it was premature. It weighed only 4 pounds. But the Most High, or she says, God, let it live. I heard the doctor say I could not survive till morning. I had often prayed for death, but now I did not want to die unless my child could die too. Many weeks passed before I was able to leave my bed. I was a mere wreck of my former self. For a year, there was scarcely a day when I was free from chills and fever. My baby also was sickly. His little limbs were often racked with pain. Dr. Flint continued his visits to look after my health, and he did not fail to remind me that my child was an addition to his stock of slaves. I felt too feeble to dispute with him and listened to his remarks in silence. His visits were less frequent, but his busy spirit could not remain quiet. He employed my brother in his office, and he was made the medium of frequent notes and messages to me. William was a bright lad and of much use to the doctor. He had learned to put up medicines, to leech, cup, and bleed. He had taught himself to read and spell. I was proud of my brother, and the old doctor suspected as such. One day, I had not seen him for several weeks. I heard his steps approaching the door. I dreaded the encounter and hid myself. He inquired for me, and of course, but I was nowhere to be found. He went to his office and dispatched William with a note. The color mounted to my brother's face when he gave it to me, and he said, "Don't you hate me, Linda, for bringing you these things?" I told him I could not blame him. He was a slave and obliged to obey his master's will. The note ordered me to come to his office. I went. He demanded to know where I was when he called. I told him I was at home. He flew into a passion and said he knew better. Then he launched out upon his usual themes: my crimes against him, my ingratitude for his forbearance. The laws were laid down to me anew, and I was dismissed. I felt humiliated that my brother should stand by and listen to such a language as would be addressed only to a slave. Poor boy, he was powerless to defend me, but I saw the tears which he vainly strove to keep back. The manifestation of feeling irritated the doctor. William could do nothing to please him. One morning, he did not arrive at the office so early as usual, and that circumstance afforded his master an opportunity to vent his spleen. He was put in jail for not coming to work as early as usual. Okay. The next day, my My brother sent a trader to the doctor with a request to be sold. His master was greatly incensed at what he called his insolence. He said he had put him there to reflect upon his bad conduct, and he certainly was not giving any evidence of repentance. For 2 days he harassed himself to find somebody to do his office work, but everything went wrong without William. He was released in order to take his old stand with many threats if he was not careful about his future behavior. As the months passed on, my boy improved in health. When he was a year old, they called him beautiful. The little vine was taking deep root in my existence, though its clinging fondness excited a mixture of love and pain. When I was most sorely oppressed, I found a solace in his smiles. I loved to watch his infant slumber, but always there was a dark cloud over my enjoyment. I could never forget that he was a slave. Sometimes I wished that he might die in infancy. God tried me. My darling became very ill. The bright eyes grew dull, and the little feet and hands were so icy cold that I thought death had already touched them. I had prayed for his death, but never so earnestly as I now prayed for his life, and my prayer was heard. Alas, what mockery it is for a slave mother to try to pray back her dying child to life. Death is better than slavery, she says. It was a sad thought that I had no name to give my child. His father caressed him and treated him kindly whenever he had a chance to see him. He was not willing, he was not unwilling that he should bear his name, but he had no legal claim to it. And if I had bestowed it upon him, my master would have regarded it as a new crime, a new piece of insolence, and would perhaps revenge it on the boy. Oh, the serpent of slavery has many and poisonous fangs. I know it's addicting, but I'm gonna stop here. We're gonna start on chapter 12, most high willing. Fear of insurrection is the next chapter. I want to thank everybody for joining me. I think I heard some sharing here on social media. Let me check it out. It's deep. She's going into some stuff. Mad because he didn't give her a chance to be the first to take her. Correct. She held out for what she thought would be a better life for her children. Correct. That's Ima Janita sharing her thoughts on the story, and you can share your thoughts too. Definitely, it is a book that, like I said earlier on, if you missed it, it's available for like $4 on Amazon. It's not expensive at all. It's free under this link here in the box where you can read along as you're going along. It's a difficult decisions that she's saying that the daughters, where today you would say you're promiscuous, you're this, you're that, and they're faced with so many choices, and as a child have no covering. And correct, her uncle Philip is enjoying his freedom, but as we read earlier on in the story, she was bequeathed to a 4-year-old. And being that the 4-year-old has no authority at this point, she's a slave of a 4-year-old. And so the father of that daughter, he's the one who's acting as guardian, and he's thirsty. He's a little wolf. And so now he's upset that she was humbled, or she chose to allow herself to be humbled by another European. So sometimes, it's said that everybody was raped, and in this situation, she wasn't raped. She chose by circumstance to try to navigate the situation so that she can get some solace. And a lot of women, many were violated, and many chose a certain path in hopes that it would mean something different for their slave child. And as she's saying here, and many mothers, I've read it, death to them was better than slavery. And that's deep. And I'm gonna leave it at that. This is Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. My name is Amuna Yisrael. As everybody's in their Black history, quote unquote, Black history mode, it's more than just quoting, did you know? Did you know such and such and such? Did you know this and that? We're going into the depths of what the institution looked like, and going past the parts that really hurt, so we can find some healing, hopefully, so that we can find some identification of some of the things that are happening today, and getting an understanding of the root system of it, the thought processes of our foremothers and forefathers, and what they had to endure, and how that lasts on to today. Dysfunctional as it may be, maladapted as it may be, to acknowledge it is the first step to healing. So until next time, definitely I look forward to hearing from you. and reading continually. Like I said, I have to stop myself because it's just that addicting, the story is. And so until next time, my name is Amuna Israel. Everybody have a blessed night. Shalom.